sometimes very powerful.
Professionals treating traumatized people.
The first one called
different targets, different waiting targets, different performers, different tick boxes that we've got to do, and that's across the board.
mental health
about being a psychiatrist, which is very maddening for patients, and it's maddening for
Shrink Radio.
Hello everyone. Let me just start my timer. I'm Seth Hunter. I've been involved with Recreate Psychiatry from the very beginning. I'm also the project manager for the Dragon Cafe, again from the very beginning. I'm a service user. I'm diagnosed bipolar, and it does seem to probably reflect the struggles that I face. And I'm also an alcoholic in recovery, so very much a sort of service user. Now, I don't have real time today to talk much about the Dragon Cafe, but I would just say do scribble it down and do Google us, because it is quite a radical, progressive project, and if you like what we're talking about today, I'm sure you'll love what we're doing at the Dragon Cafe. Now, I've got 6 main points that I'd like to try and cover today, so I'm just going to try and push on because I tend to be a bit verbose, and I'm just trying to get through it. So my first one was, the first thing that I really noticed was that my difficulty in accessing mental health services leading to my rapid deterioration in mental health when I really, really needed it. I had really, really poor interaction with services from the very, very beginning. At the time that I got very ill, probably about, not even sure, probably about a dozen years ago, more than that, I was deputy manager for a young homeless people hostel near Covent Garden in London. The job was very stressful. It was a 70-bedded unit. There was gang culture, there was drug dealing, there was gun running, and it was generally a very unstable, aggressive and paranoid atmosphere. And I just really wasn't coping very well. I was new to management, and I was drinking very heavily after work to cope. After a relatively short period of time, I left the job, citing stress, but really it was a lot more serious than that. I was highly anxious and becoming increasingly paranoid, thinking that my phone calls and emails were being intercepted by the police and that undercover police and gangsters were following me. As time went on, I became increasingly psychotic and saw sinister meanings in the most innocent of situations. My decline intensified and I feared going out, and at one point was even walking around with a knife in my pocket to defend myself should the gangsters try and get me. This was all very unusual behaviour for me, as I was a very gentle, kind and loving person. I moved back in with my mother, and she repeatedly tried to get mental health services to come out and assess me. She was very, very worried about me. By now I was acutely paranoid, psychotic at times, and too anxious to leave my room, let alone the house, and go to services. My mother's attempts were in vain. Eventually the police got involved, and a long standoff occurred whereby I barricaded myself into my bedroom. After hours and hours of negotiations, the police eventually broke down my bedroom door. I jumped out of a first floor window into a garden. Unhurt, it wasn't very high. I was technically arrested for criminal damage. I think I'd thrown a wine bottle and it had hit my neighbour's roof. I was essentially just trying to get help, and the charge was dropped. But I was held in a police cell for 2 nights. And this was my introduction into the mental health service. Looking back on it now, it seems such a waste of resources and unnecessarily stressful for me and all those that cared about me. I'm confident coming to mental health services via the police could have been avoided if mental health services had been willing to meet me on my terms rather than insist I go in for an outpatient assessment. I wasn't treated very well by the police. At one time I was hit several times with a truncheon, for example. Also, the police got me out of my holding cell dressed in full riot gear, and there was about 6 of them. And I was taken to hospital in the back of a police van, handcuffed, wearing only my boxer shorts. So my entry into the mental health system was one of oppression and aggression from the very beginning. The next point was the terrible physical environment of the average ward, leading to dysfunctional, unhealthy atmosphere and not a place to recover. I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act and held for a month. In this time I was held at 3 different hospitals. Each of them were fairly horrible, really. In the first one, still paranoid and being convinced that staff were going to kill me and somehow involved with the undercover gangsters, I decided I was going to try and speed up the process by pushing one member of staff, not particularly hard and not in an aggressive way. I was immediately pushed to the ground by 4 big, strong men and picked up and put on a bed where I had medication forcibly injected into my buttock, supposedly to calm me down, I guess. So my first experience of medication was one of force, and not so much to help me therapeutically, but to manage my behaviour. I can understand why this occurred, but it really didn't help build trust. The institutions, like was mentioned in the clip, felt like low-level prisons rather than places conducive to good mental health. Double doors for security, awful neon strip lights, couldn't access hot water to make tea, presumably as hot water could be used as a weapon. No plants, no or limited access to a garden, terrible food, all processed and generally unhealthy. TV rooms even with a broken TV on or with a very poor reception. The only place with an exercise room was closed. The key had been lost. In the last hospital I stayed on, drug use was apparent and some violence was evident. And I slept in a dorm. I don't think they do this anymore, but at the time, there was like eight beds in an open room with white curtains dividing us. So privacy was almost impossible. This all added to an atmosphere of latent and overt aggression, resentment, boredom, and quite frankly, of lost souls. I understand that mental health professionals have to deal with life and death scenarios quite a lot, and I guess this is likely to lead to behaviour in environments that are risk-averse with an emphasis on containment, not about creativity or taking chances. But it seems if you go onto your average ward, then it's all about locking doors and making sure that things can't be used to hurt yourself with. It's dehumanising. Point 3, clear power imbalances leading to struggles for power and resentment. Even in my unwell state, it was clear to me just how hierarchical the setups were in hospitals. It seems to me that the principal power lies with the consultant psychiatrists, some of whom seem to treat the ward a bit like their fiefdom. The psychiatrists lower down the rank then come up, then therapists, then the nurses, and then lastly the patient. Sure, tokenism is given to the idea of a flattened hierarchy, but it always seems to me that ultimately power lies with the consultant psychiatrist. Why am I so preoccupied with power imbalances? I guess, over the many, many years I've been involved with mental health services, both personally and professionally, it seems to me that not having power, not having many choices, is almost a given for the average person, if there is such a thing, with a mental illness. I think we live in a time where struggles for power are particularly relevant. Social class, male v female, straight v gay, terrorism, politics, Brexit. We live in polarised and atomised times, but it's particularly evident on a psychiatric ward, the them and us struggle. Nurses, when I did see them, generally hid in the staff room and only came out at medication time. And I mentioned in that sound clip that you heard that I really have a very strong memory of being requested to line up against a big wall of about 30 people just getting medication. No one explained to me what my diagnosis was. I didn't know why I was in hospital, and no one explained to me what my medication was supposed to be doing. I work closely with a consultant psychiatrist who's very much involved with Recreate Psychiatry, Caldoun, and he pointed out to me that you're never really going to be able to shift the power dynamic because, of course, it's enshrined in law. It takes to qualified people to assess you under the Mental Health Act. But Recreate Psychiatry is an attempt to at least suspend that power difference for long enough to really meet each other on a level. Point 4. Not being listened to authentically, leading to frustration and challenging behaviour. No one really spoke to me at all, certainly no attempt at a therapeutic interaction. And when my concerned friends called the ward to arrange meetings with me, the staff were difficult and invasive about times my friends could see me. In many ways, it seems to me that at its core, mental illness is in part about isolation and lack of communication. So to be so disempowered and ignored in hospital felt awful. I simply just wanted to be heard and validated. It seemed my fragmented psyche was being treated by a fragmented system. I think for me, one of the most maddening things was the feeling of not being authentically listened to. On the rare occasions when I got to speak to a mental health professional, I may have been heard but not authentically listened to. I can almost hear the whirls of their cogs going around in their brains. They were listening to me to tick off the symptoms that they were kind of waiting to spill out of my mouth. So it wasn't a very authentic being listened to. Number 5. The dominance of the medical model, not being seen as a whole person and not having my creative needs nurtured, leading to me being defined by limiting labels. I remain frustrated with the current dominance of the medical model, this search to find the right pill and nothing else. Don't get me wrong, I've benefited enormously from medication, and in fact right now I speak to you with being on both sodium valproate and olanzapine, and it helps keep me very well. But I don't think this should be the only thing. Humans are complex and must be seen as a whole, not squeezed into diagnostic boxes. And the truth is we don't really understand how the brain works, let alone the mind. We have theories, but not unassailable facts. We should all be a bit more humble. Could it be an existential crisis? Spiritual well-being is not even talked about. The soul seems not considered. Recreate psychiatry means the medical model has still got a place, but it's potentially not the dominant model. It's not the only way of thinking of things, and I think that's very encouraging. Creativity and finding meaning are also regarded as important. Towards the end of my month sectioning, I was assessed by a room full of mental health professionals. There must have been a dozen from a variety of specialities and varying seniorities. A very strange process to be asked, such personal questions by a room full of general silent strangers sitting in judgment. Eventually I was allowed out of the ward for escorted leaves. I knew that if I kept my head down, then eventually I'd be allowed out for unescorted leave. So already I was learning the system. I'd already decided that as soon as this happened, I would go out and not come back, and this is indeed what I did. I'd made up my mind that being at home, unwell, vulnerable, drinking alcoholically and without support was preferable to being in a ward where anger, boredom and illness were the norm. I kind of knew I wouldn't get well in hospital, and it seemed I was right. I went back to hospital with a friend and arranged to be an outpatient, a far better setup. Finally, what impact has being involved in Recreate Psychiatry had on my well-being? Being involved has really helped my well-being and ongoing recovery. It's been very empowering to be able to talk to mental health professionals with the power differential suspended as much as possible on a level, and to be able to collaborate, reflect and have honest conversations about how services could be improved for those that work in them as well as for service users. For me, I guess Recreate Psychiatry is a bit of a revolution of the heart, not just for the mental health professionals I get to speak to, but also for me as a patient. It's a two-way thing, and I think we can all do with being a bit more compassionate to one another, because we're all struggling under a difficult time at the moment due to politically motivated cuts. Patients project their anger that really belongs to short-sighted political decisions leading to under-resourced mental health services. This gets projected onto frontline workers, and frontline workers close down and become defensive in return, and it becomes a catch-22. I do think that this sort of unbridled anger and resentment can be incredibly poisonous. I had to really let go of mine to recover. Finally, Recreate Psychiatry has helped me to understand that the current system is set up for only the psychiatrists to hold ultimate responsibility for their patient, and that to me is a problem. One of the things that's been quite important for me to realise in my own recovery now is that now that I'm no longer in crisis, is that I'm actually responsible for my physical, mental and spiritual well-being. Mental health professionals and others in my life collaborate with me to stay well, but it's ultimately my responsibility. But this has taken 15 years of long, hard recovery, and I'm not saying when you first walk into a ward in crisis, you're going to be thinking like this. What I am saying is Recreate Psychiatry is a way of furthering a more genuine recovery because of its emphasis on listening, equality, collaboration, creativity and reflection. I'm pretty sure that I'll never go back to hospital. I think that's because I really look after myself now and collaborate well with my mental health providers, and that's because I genuinely feel listened to. That's really, really healing and empowering. Finally, I'd like to give the final thought to one of Gandhi's truisms. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. Thank you.